You've probably heard the name. Maybe you've seen him on the cover of an old Forgotten Realms novel. Or maybe you've had the misfortune of crossing paths with one of his clones during a campaign gone off the rails. But behind the beard, the pipe, and the smug air of someone who's absolutely read every book in Candlekeep, twice, lies a story that spans thousands of years, several incarnations of a goddess, and enough magical disasters to keep Faerun's insurance rates unspeakable. This is not just the story of a wizard. This is the story of a man chosen by Mystra, goddess of magic. A man who's walked through death, madness, and divine fire more than once and somehow keeps coming back for more. This is the legend of Elminster. Our story begins over 1,200 years ago in a long forgotten kingdom of Athlanthar, in a quiet village of Helden. A boy named Elminster was born to Ethrin, a noble lord, and Amrathale, a woodsman's daughter. His life was peaceful until the mage lords came. The mage lords were cruel sorcerers who ruled Athlanthar with fire and fear. One of their number, Undarl the Dark, slaughtered Elminster's entire family. The boy, barely 12, was left with nothing but grief and his father's sword. Forced into a life of survival, he became a brigand and later a thief, drifting towards the capital of Hastarl, where the mage lords reigned. There, Elminster buried his name and lived in the shadows, hiding his pain beneath a life of petty crime. But even then, he refused to become a killer. It wasn't revenge he wanted, it was justice. In Hastarl, fate came calling, cloaked in power. Elminster met the Magister, the mortal vessel of Mystra, goddess of magic. The Magister saw potential in the boy and offered to teach him magic. Elminster flatly refused, his hatred for spellcasters still burning hot. Wizards had stolen everything from him. But Mystra was not so easily dissuaded. She came to him in disguise, guiding his journey, testing his resolve. And in time, she revealed herself. She showed him a vision of magic not as tyranny, but as a force for balance, a language for shaping the world. For the first time, Elminster saw magic as more than a weapon. To move unseen in the world of wizards, Elminster then assumed a new identity, Elmara, a young woman and priestess of Mystra. He lived among his enemies, learning their ways, gathering knowledge, and letting Mystra reshape not just his skills, but his soul. Eventually, Elmara encountered a mysterious sorceress named Muriala, who took her on as a pupil. Under Muriala's guidance, Elminster finally shed his self-imposed mask. He emerged once more as Elminster, now not only a priest, but a mage and a formidable one. With knowledge and power in hand, he returned to Hastarl to confront the mage lords. What followed was a magical war of staggering scale. Elminster clashed with the sorcerers who had destroyed his family and corrupted his homeland. After a final, brutal confrontation, he prevailed. Athlanthar was his for the taking. But Elminster didn't want the crown. He had no interest in ruling. He placed his friend Helm, a noble knight, on the throne and walked away. His vengeance complete, his purpose fulfilled. He was ready to leave that life behind. And then came one last surprise. Muriala the sorceress, who was mentoring him, revealed her true identity. She had been Mystra all along. The goddess herself had walked beside him, guided his every step. And now she offered him a choice, to become one of her chosen, a mortal champion bound to the very fabric of magic, the weave itself. Elminster said yes. From that moment on, Elminster ceased being just a man. He became something more, and something less. A servant of Mystra, a guardian of magic, a symbol of power and paradox. In the centuries that followed, Elminster traveled the breadth of Faerun, appearing in ancient cities like Myth Drannor. He wandered the wilds of the world, studying the lost secrets of fallen empires and shaping the course of kingdoms, sometimes subtly, sometimes with fire. Much of what he did during this era remains unrecorded, even to this day, but we know that he helped guide the rise of powerful mages, protected sacred sites of magic, and trained others chosen by Mystra, including Storm Silverhand, Alassa Shentranta, and Sailuni, figures who would later become legends in their own right, and hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Some even say that Waterdeep, one of the greatest cities in the realms, bears the mark of Elminster's hand in its early foundations. He had become both teacher and trickster, a man who wielded ancient secrets but rarely offered straight answers. Then came the Time of Troubles, a cataclysmic period when the gods themselves were cast down from the heavens and forced to walk the earth. The weave faltered, chaos spread across the realms, and once again Elminster stood at the heart of the storm. He fought beside a group of adventurers known as the Rangers Three, resisting an invasion of shape-shifting foes known only as the Shadow Masters. When Shadowdale was threatened by an army of Zhentarim, led by the Avatar of Bane himself, Elminster stood alone in his tower and fought the god. The resulting explosion leveled his home, and Elminster was presumed dead. But in truth, he had been cast into another plane of existence, a limbo beyond the world, recovering from the divine duel. During his absence, his allies held the line. The Rangers Three, the Knights of Myth Drannor, and the Chosen of Mystra fought to preserve the realms from ruin. Eventually, Elminster returned, and when he did, the tide turned once again in favor of Faerun. In the history of the realms, few moments compared to the devastation of 1385 DR, the year of blue fire. That's when Mystra, goddess of magic, and Elminster's patron, love, and anchor, was slain. The culprit? A god named Sirik, working alongside the shadow god Shar, who had long sought control of the weave. When Mystra fell, the weave collapsed, and magic across Faerun became unstable, deadly, or simply ceased to function. What followed was the Spell Plague, an arcane disaster that twisted the land, shattered kingdoms, and left even the most powerful spellcasters utterly broken. As one of Mystra's chosen, Elminster was nearly unmade. Her death severed the bond that had anchored his power and his sanity for over 1,000 years. Magic didn't vanish from him entirely, but each spell he cast tore at his mind, unraveling his thoughts, dragging him toward madness. For a time, only Storm Silverhand, his fellow chosen and dearest companion, could reach him, offering her strength to keep him grounded. Others weren't so lucky. Alissa Silverhand, and legendary Symbol, Queen of Aglarond, and Elminster's great love, suffered worse than any. The spell plague tore through her, leaving her a being of raw, barely contained magical energy, a woman in a state of perpetual arcane madness. Elminster did what he could. He became a man with a single desperate purpose: to restore Alisra's mind, to bring her back, even if only for fleeting moments. He sought out magical relics, arcane sources of the ancient variety, anything that retained enough power to tether her soul. Using those relics, he channeled their energy into her, giving her short-lived moments of clarity, brief windows where the woman he loved returned to him. But it was never enough, and the more power he gathered, the more dangerous he became. At one point, overwhelmed by grief, Elminster drew too deeply from the magical tides and absorbed Alisra's power in a failed attempt to stabilize her. The act backfired spectacularly. The magic within him twisted the land itself, corrupting the Silverhand farm in Shadowdale. The earth buckled, plague-ridden wastelands spread, and Elminster, now a danger to everyone, was defeated by adventurers and left to wither in exile. It wasn't punishment, it was mercy. He was broken, grieving, and radioactive with arcane power. Left alone, he might fade, or implode, or both. But he didn't. Loss didn't stop Elminster. It transformed him. He became a ghost in his own legend, drifting through the world in disguise, collecting magic in secret. Storm Silverhand remained his greatest ally, helping him gather power to ease Alestra's condition. But power alone wasn't enough. To reach the places he needed, wards that only the Chosen or gods could pierce, Elminster turned to more dangerous artifacts. The 9 of the Spell Plague, relics of immense, volatile magic. And for that, he needed help. He sought out a descendant, a mortal man named Amarune, Whitewave, who shared Elminster's blood and, more importantly, could house Elminster's soul when the time came. It did. One of his oldest enemies, Manshoon, struck. The centuries-old archmage had long opposed Elminster, scheming, cloning, and clawing at the Chosen's legacy. Manshoon had spent years unraveling Elminster's contingencies, and when he finally struck, it was nearly fatal. But not quite. Elminster's body was destroyed, but his essence survived, and with Storm's help, he bound himself to Amarune, living as a second mind within his descendant. It was strange, unsettling, but it kept him in the fight. Time passed. Elminster learned to exist in borrowed bodies, even once inhabiting the noble lord Arith del Castle of Cormier. Eventually, Storm discovered that one of the Spell Plague artifacts might finally offer a cure for Alestra, a chance to restore her mind for good. They found her in a hidden cave, secluded and barely holding on. Elminster, Storm, and Amarune brought the relic to her, but Manshoon was there too. And for a brief moment, a truce was struck. The ancient rivals stood side by side against an even greater threat. But Manshoon is still Manshoon, and the moment Alestra was whole enough to walk away, he betrayed them. He attacked. Elminster was cast into the Underdark, his body broken again, his mind a drifting wisp. There in the dark, Elminster met a long-forgotten name, Silmrostar Agrumenthar, an elf of ancient Cormanthor, who still had held fragments of the Weave's old power. They traveled together, and for a time, Elminster lived in her body, moving once more through the world with borrowed flesh. Eventually, he returned to the surface, traveling to Cormier, then back to Amarune, and finally to a moment long in the making, the return of Mystra. But even Mystra's return did not bring peace. Alasra, the symbol, continued to sacrifice everything she had to help restore the torn weave and hold the fabric of reality together. In the final battle, she called out for help, but Elminster could not reach her in time. She died, for good. Consumed by fury, Elminster turned on Manshoon, obliterating his body with silver fire. But he knew, as he always knew, that Manshoon would return. Evil, after all, is nothing if not persistent. Still, Elminster didn't stop. He had returned, but his work was far from over. He wandered again, bolstering the weave, combating the return of the Shardovar, and even crossing spells with the Lich Larlok, one of the most dangerous undead in all of existence. He watched as Myth Drannor fell again, saw cities like Flan and Panthar rise and crash, and stood with the Chosen as the second sundering reshaped the realms once more. And through all that, he endured. For all his grand titles, Sage of Shadowdale, Chosen of Mystra, Defender of the Weave, Elminster's origin was humble, and he preferred to keep it that way. But for those curious enough to pry, Elminster was born to Elminster Aumar, a noble son of Earthroot, one of the 7 princes of Athalanthar, and Aranthale, Gold Chief, a forester's daughter. Their love crossed class lines, and Elminster carried both noble blood and a connection to the wilds. That bloodline would twist and tangle over the centuries. Elminster lived long enough to father children, outlive most of them, and see his descendants rise and fall in strange corners of the realms. Among the most notable, Narella Shalance, who earned the title Silken Shadow of Marsember, and Simorn Omar, a half elf sorcerer thief with a talent for mischief that would have made Elminster proud, or deeply annoyed. Though many call him a father, far fewer knew the truth of it. Elminster rarely stayed long in one place, and when he did, it was usually at the edge of war, calamity, or cataclysm. Over 2,000 years, even a stubborn old wizard like Elminster makes a few friends. Some were legends in their own right, others footnotes in forgotten tomes, but all played their part in his tale. From his early days as a thief, he crossed paths with names like Farrell, a fellow sneak and rogue philosopher. Later, he would spar and collaborate with powerful archmages like Kelvin Blackstaff Runson, a fellow chosen of Mystra and ideological foil. His travels brought him into circles of royalty and regents. Queen Fifarel of Cormyr, whose court he influenced behind the scenes. Count Galen Igrath, whose ambitions Elminster quietly curbed. And even Melagar the Dragon Lord, who sought Elminster's aid and sometimes his silence. Perhaps more surprising is Elminster's reach beyond Toril. He has, on more than one occasion, shared drinks and spells with Mordenkainen, the famed Archmage of Greyhawk, Dalamar, the shadowed sorcerer of Kryn, and even a peculiar figure from our own world, Ed of the Greenwood, who, depending on whom you ask, may or may not be the very author of Elminster's tales. Then there are the Seven Sisters, Mystra's mortal daughters, and among Elminster's most trusted allies. He raised three of them, Silune, Anastra Silune, and Storm Silverhand, and traveled alongside them for centuries. Of all the beings in the realms, Storm remained his closest companion, through grief, exile, and rebirth. Over the centuries, Elminster took on many students, some bright, some dangerous, and some both. Among the more successful were Laheo, his scribe and sometime adventurer, who survived the chaos of Shadowdale to become a legend in his own quiet way. Layan, Wolfbeard, a dwarf whose magic and axe were matched only by his temper. Saimil Marul, a brilliant transmuter who learned just enough to terrify his neighbors and thankfully no more. But not every apprentice lived long enough to learn their final lesson. One thief attempted to rob Elminster at a mage fair. He wasn't seen again. Others, like Vandercast of Cormyr, never wore the title of apprentice, but learned much from Elminster all the same, whether they admitted it or not. And then there was Samas, the cautionary tale of all cautionary tales, a student with brilliance in spades and ambition to match. Samus grew obsessed with the cycle of life and death, and with claiming a legacy of his own. That obsession birthed the cult of the dragon, a doomsday faction bent on turning dragons into undead Dracoliches, some of them, and bringing about an apocalyptic end to the realms. Elminster tried to stop him. He failed. It would not be the last time one of his teachings was twisted into something terrible. A life like Elminster's doesn't go unnoticed. He's collected more enemies than a Zent's assassin's hit list, and many of them live far longer. The Malugrim, shape-shifting horrors from the plane of shadow, despised Elminster for interfering in their invasion plans and unraveling their illusions across Faerun. The greatest thorn in his side, however, remained Manchun, founder of the Zentrum. Their feud spanned centuries, filled with betrayals, magical duels, and even outright murder. They've killed each other more than once, and both keep coming back. Elminster has outwitted him, humiliated him, and at one point reduced him to ash with a blast of silver fire. Still, Manchun persists. Some rivalries never die. They just respawn with spite. Some of his other enemies included House Cormriel of Chesenta, who once placed a price on his head. Veruna, the masked lord of the Drow, who viewed Elminster as a meddler in the divine game, also certain I did not pronounce that correctly. And even the dark god Shar, whose vendetta against Mystra, and by extension Elminster, was a cosmic conflict. Through it all, Elminster has endured, but not without cost. He's watched empires fall, he's outlived lovers, apprentices, allies, children, even Mystra herself, more than once. He's wielded magic that could remake continents and watched it slip through his fingers. And what has he learned? That power always comes at a price. It's a lesson he's taught again and again. To kings, to tyrants, to overeager mages who thought they could bend reality without consequence. The weave is not a toy. Magic is not just a tool. It's a living force that resists control, punishes arrogance, and remembers the wounds inflicted upon it. Elminster, for all his wisdom and bravado, has stumbled, broken, and burned. But each time he's rebuilt, often in stranger forms, with new names, new faces, and even more regrets. He's not a god. He's not even a hero in the traditional sense. He's a survivor, a meddler, a guardian of the realms who understands that sometimes the most powerful thing a wizard can do is say nothing at all. So, what can we learn from a wizard who's outlived gods? That magic is never free, that curiosity has a cost, and that even the greatest of us are, at best, temporary caretakers of forces we don't fully understand. Elminster's tale is not a straight line, it's a spiral, a tangle of triumph and tragedy, wit and weariness, and through it all, he remains, wandering the realms, mumbling to himself, pipe in hand, half amused, half tired, and always watching. If you ever meet him, ask your question wisely. He might give you an answer, or he might send you to clean owl droppings off a magic tower roof. Either way, you'll remember the lesson. Now, but before we go, there's one name that deserves mention, perhaps the most important one of all, Ed Greenwood. While the realms are filled with archmages, gods, and heroes, it's Ed who truly breathes life into them. He didn't just create Elminster, he's lived him for decades, shaping the world of the Forgotten Realms with more imagination and heart than most of us can dream of, and I thank him for it. If anyone is Elminster, it's Ed. Pipe, wit, robes, everything. If you'd like to hear directly from the old mage himself, I highly recommend checking out Ed Greenwood's YouTube channel, where he continues to share stories, lore, and the sheer joy of world building like only he can. So thank you, Ed, for the weave, the wonder, and the wisdom. The realms wouldn't be the same without you, seeing as you created them. Until next time, keep your spells prepared, your curiosity in check, and beware the old man in the pointy hat. He might just be watching you back. This is James from the Dungeon Puffin. Later, guys.